Welcome, International Stress Awareness Day 2017. Here I am again, your host, Danielle Sax. As you know, I am an international speaker, coach, and author of the book, Shifting Out of Chronic Stress. But now today, at this time, I am so honored to have a very special guest who has helped me out in an emergency, but who is maybe not an expert in stress, but an expert in a lot of other things. She's a global leader. I'm talking about Teresa de Grosbois. Now, Grosbois, do I say it well? Is it a French name? How do I spell it out, Teresa? I forgot to ask you.
No worries. It's de Grosbois. It's a French name.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love the name. And in Belgium, we speak, Dutch, French, and English. So we can pronounce it in all different ways. So I'm just going to call you Teresa.
Love it.
I'm just going to call you Teresa. And I want the audience to know what a global leader you are, because you are a 4 times best-selling author. You have your book, Mass Influence, that was I believe a hit one bestseller, and you also are an international speaker. You are specializing in topics of influence and success. You teach a lot of courses, I read, and but for me the main thing, what I admire in you so much, Teresa, is that you are the chair of the Evolutionary Business Council and the co-founder of the Global Influence Summit. And I've been having a bit of taste of you in these last weeks, and I just find you such an extraordinary global leader. And as a woman, is there anything you would like to add onto this introduction of yourself, something that you want us to know about yourself?
No, you've been very generous. Thank you. I really appreciate that, Danielle.
Are you sure? There's nothing, because the official, I also like the Teresa underneath all this official thing.
Well,
is there something you like to share?
is a gypsy. The Teresa underneath it all is a gypsy.
I love that. Oh, that's nice. Good.
I love the fact that I've created a life where I get to travel around and see different places all over the world. I spend my winters in Costa Rica and my summers in Canada, and travel in between in the shoulder seasons. I think so many of us think we have to live the life we're given, which is probably one of the biggest things that creates stress. And about 20 years ago, someone introduced me to the notion of, no, you can actually design your dream life and just slowly move toward it. And just every year focusing on create 1 or 2 things different that gets you closer to what your dream life would be. And I have to say, I couldn't have envisioned the life I'm living now 20 years ago. I couldn't have imagined that I would be a #1 international best-selling author who gets to travel all over the world speaking on big stages, that I would be someone who gets to create an intentional community down in Costa Rica, which I affectionately call my unashamed attempt to pick my neighbors. I think sometimes as humans, we resign ourselves to what's so, and we forget to think about what could be. Or we think about what could be in a context of, oh, but I could never have that. And the minute you start thinking that way, I think that's one of the greatest stress inducers in your life. It's so important to actually believe that you can create something better, even if you're just doing it for 20 minutes every day. Doing something that lights you up more, brings you more happiness, moves you toward that life you wish you had. You'll find that 20 minutes will start to expand and it'll become a whole lot more.
I understand completely what you're saying. Now, I have a bit of a personal question, and your personal encounter with stress, has that been more in your personal life, or has that been more in your professional life? Is there a difference there?
I think stress is stress. And usually when you've got stress in one area, it starts to show up everywhere. In fact, I would say probably the most stressful year I ever had in my life was also one of the biggest gifts I ever had.
Yes.
Because it happened probably about 17 or 18 years ago now. I had a year, I affectionately now call it my really bad year, because everything in my life fell apart at once. up until that point, on paper, I would have looked like I had the dream life. I had a beautiful 6-figure income, a gorgeous house, an outwardly seeming great job, the 2 kids, everything we might think of on paper. And yet in the first 6 months of that life, or that year, my whole life started falling apart. My father had passed away.
Oh, yeah.
My marriage ended. The company I had been running up to that point failed. And my health ended up in a massive tailspin. Talk about stress. The only thing I knew is every morning I would wake up, having to remind myself to breathe. And just being very present to how incredibly unhappy I was. And but that led me to probably one of the biggest, most miraculous moments of my life, because I can actually remember the moment my life changed.
Yes.
I'm sitting on the bathroom floor in my post-marriage breakup condo. I'm surrounded by tools because I've always been a renovator, and this bathroom is going to be my latest project, and there's literally tears streaming down my eyes, because the only thought in my head is, it's me that needs renovating. It's me that needs renovating. And I'm looking back over the last 20 years of my life, and I can't honestly point to a time that I can remember I was really turned on, lit up, happy, and excited about my life. I've been going through the motions and almost playing the part in some play of what other people thought a good life would be for me. And the beautiful thing about that moment was, it was the moment I made the decision that I was going to be my next project.
Yes.
And that made all the difference in the world. I started doing every self-help course known to man. I actually went back to school. I did an entire certificate in mediation, because I had always been a conflict avoider, and I knew I needed to get that under control if I was ever going to be happy again. And I got a lot more serious about my health and my yoga and my meditation. And slowly and steadily, my life started to shift, and the stress started to evaporate from my life.
Wow, that is such a powerful story, because, Teresa, you know my work a little bit, and I always say to people, you are your best investment. And your self-care and self-love are your birthright. People think they need to live for the outside world. That's how we are conditioned when we are young. And so our theme of this year, Speak Up and Speak Out About Stress, is exactly what you were saying, is actually being aware of what is going on here. What is my life about? What do I really want? What am I doing? What am I thinking? So I love that personal story. Thank you for that. And if you would have a message about speak up and speak out about stress to the audience that is listening here, would you encourage them to talk about their stress?
Absolutely. In fact, I would say speak up and speak out about anything. Because the fact that you're sitting silent, accepting your life as it is, and not actually moving forward to try and actually create the life you really want is probably the biggest inducer of your stress. So learning to speak up and speak out, tell the world that you need help, and start investing in yourself. So many of us have been programmed to think that self-care and putting yourself first is a selfish act, when in fact it's the most generous and giving act you could ever do. Because until you're looked after, until you really learn how to love yourself and make sure everything in your life is working, it's very difficult to love other people. And putting yourself last is probably causing so much stress and so much anxiety and so much negative energy in your own life that you're probably being nasty and horrible to all the people around you and causing stress in their lives without you ever even noticing it. And I don't mean that as a blame thing. I humbly talk about this because that used to be me 25 years ago. And I think the most important thing you can do is start to really look at, what do you need in your life that helps you feel more ease and flow? When I started actually noticing, that it was the silliest little things that sometimes would make me feel happy and make me feel abundant and prosperous. You know, one day I was eating a dessert with a long-handled sherbet spoon, and I suddenly felt like a millionaire. I'm like, wow, why is it making me happy to eat with a long-handled sherbet spoon? And then I realized as a child, I was, you know, I grew up in fairly have-not situations. And one of my best friends who lived down the street, at their house, there was one long-handled sherbet spoon that was like a prized possession of the family. And all the kids would fight over it, who got to use it for the dessert. Well, of course, we guests in the house could only look with envy as everyone fought over this long-handled dessert spoon. And so here I am, 35 years later, eating a dessert and feeling like a millionaire simply because of the spoon is triggering a remembrance for me as a child. And I thought, wow, isn't that interesting? Well, I went and bought myself a whole set of them and started eating my breakfast and my smoothies with them all the time. Because sometimes it's those little things that just put us in a mindset of, I'm going to do something decadent that makes my inner child happy. And little Tessie, my inner child, just lights up at some of those little things. And so doing some of those little things that bring you joy, and who cares what anyone else thinks, can sometimes be an awesome place to start when you're looking at the stress and your ability to love yourself.
Wow, you are giving such a value here, because there are so many little things we can do. You know, people think stress, how do I manage my stress? They think it's a big thing, but it all starts with these little things. And I'm so happy you talk about, you know, stop thinking that self-care and self-love are selfish. You know, it is the first thing. When you speak up and speak out about your stress, you have the right to speak up about your feelings, your needs, your values, what you find. You know, I think that is very important. Now, I'm just going to ask another question that pops up in my mind now. Is there any link that you would like to address here? Because you talk a lot about influence and success, that's your specialty. Is there any link there you think with success that you could explain to our audience? Is there anything there to say about stress and success and influence?
I would say all of it links, because when you look at what creates influence in your life, it's actually the same things that would tend to alleviate stress in your life. Go figure, right? Because when you start to really learn about how influence works, some of the core foundational principles of influence are actually the things that have you move toward what are the things you love the most. What are the things that you find most easy to do? One of the reasons I wrote Mass Influence was because there's a lot of good people, everyday heroes out there, who have this notion of, someday when I have enough money, or someday when I'm smart enough or wealthy enough, or when I have the time, or someday I will. And the I will is what is really the dream in their heart, right? And they don't realize that if they would just pull the someday toward themselves and really get into, okay, what if that was now? And what if even if I just spent 20 minutes a day on my someday dreams, not only would your stress level really come down, your influence would start to really go up. One of the core principles of influence is actually authenticity. And there's a lot of different definitions of authenticity out there. Here's mine. Authenticity is just your inside voice saying the same thing as your outside voice. In other words, what you're thinking is in alignment with your words and your actions, right? And, you know, we can all tell, like when you meet that salesman who's trying to sell you something, and really, you know, what's going on in between their ears. It's just, I really need this sale. There's like a desperation going. We can see that disconnect in other people. Well, guess what? People can see it in you too. So anytime you're working in a job you hate, anytime you're in a career where you feel like you've sold your soul, anytime you're working with clients or colleagues that you don't really like, your inside voice is saying something different than your outside voice. You're running the risk of being inauthentic. And guess what? Your influence is waning. Because people are really attracted to and trust authenticity. Authenticity builds trust. Trust builds influence, right? And go figure that those are the very same things that tend to cause stress in your life when you're working in a soul-killing job you don't like, when you're working with people you don't like. And so when you really look at it, sometimes we think, oh, I can't possibly give up this job because you know, I make an extra $5,000 or $7,000 a year at this job, even though I hate it. And there's a much better role for you, something that would be a lot more aligned with where your heart's at. And yet you're probably spending $5,000 to $7,000 a year on all those things to try and alleviate the stress
Yes.
that the horrible position is giving you, you know?
Yes.
So when you really start to notice and look at these things in your life, it's not a bad idea to sit down and journal at night and really like write about what is causing you stress, and is there ways you could have less of that and more of the things you love. It's not only unselfish for you to do that, it's
Yes.
actually one of the most giving things you can do, because you're going to be a lot more effective as a human being, be a much higher contribution to the world, and there'll be a lot more impact from you moving through your day in terms of being a contribution to everyone around you. So one of the most selfless things you can do is really look at where your heart's aligned. And that not only is going to alleviate your stress, it's going to highly increase your influence.
Wow. Thank you for that, alliance between all, there is a connection between all these things. We know that, but you've explained it so nicely. Now, what I also want to know from you personally, how do you manage your stress? Do you have any strategy, any personal thing? I believe you when you say about the spoon. I mean, in a child, very important to keep that, loved and, but is there any technique, any tool, anything you would like to say to our audience, what you do personally when you are stressed? For example, if you have to speak on stage, or I don't know if it stresses you still, but if you have a problem, a challenge, in your own life, what would you do first to take away the stress?
Well, I think my biggest takeaway would be not only make friends with your inner child, but make friends with your inner elder.
Yeah.
Because you have a version of yourself that's, 2 years old, 3 years old, 7 years old, that went through a lot of traumatic experiences that might be creating a lot of self-talk that's really coming up in those moments of stress. So I do a lot of time journaling and talking to my inner child. When we go on stage, I give her a job. She gets to be in charge of fun, So, but I tell her she doesn't have to worry about the rest of it. She doesn't need to worry about everything else. She doesn't need to worry about whether the audience likes her or any of that stuff. That's my job as an adult. And then I also often talk internally to my inner elder.
Wow.
I imagine a version of myself that's like 30 years older, 85-year-old Teresa, who's really awesome and sexy and out there just creating change in the world. And sometimes I give up the reins to her and I let her run the show, because if I'm not feeling up to a specific circumstance, I let that older, wiser version of myself run the show. And basically I ask myself, what would she do? What would my older inner elder do from the standpoint of all that inner wisdom? And sometimes that exercise applies to when I walk on stage. Sometimes it applies to when I have a big decision in life, like what opportunities do I want to take? Do I want to, move away from this opportunity that seemed really lucrative but isn't lighting my heart up? And I let my inner elder make those decisions. Basically I talk to her and say, from the perspective of when we're 85, am I going to look back with regret that I did this? Or am I going to look back with regret that I didn't walk away from that? And that is often a great way. It's a great acid test. It's a great barometer of whether or not the decisions you're making are actually moving you toward less stress and more influence, I would add, or higher stress in places where you're not that effective in your life. Stress comes from being ineffective at what you're doing. So go figure that actually you're doing yourself and everyone else a favor to look at where are you more effective as a human being? Where does your self-care actually have you become someone who's a much higher contribution to the world? And when you get that correlation between those things, it all gets a lot more easy. It feels like floating downstream.
I agree. Now, I've got another question to almost wrap up this interview, because I can talk with you for hours. But you are in Costa Rica, I'm in Belgium, and it's night here and it's day there. So I just would like to know from you, Teresa, if you would have one sentence of wisdom, after all your experience, all your life experience, success experience, influence experiences, one sentence of wisdom to this audience here today, what would it be about stress? It's a hard one, I
I
know,
would
because
say I would say give yourself permission to take action on your dreams. Even if it's 5 minutes a night, 10 minutes a night, take action on your dreams, because until you actually take action, you're just dreaming. And your dreams are not only what grow influence in your life, they're what move you away from stress and anxiety.
yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a powerful one. I cannot
Thank you.
thank you enough. I really want to say that from my heart. I know you've been traveling. I know it hasn't been easy. And you responded immediately to my ask for help. So I want to honor you personally. Thank you personally, Teresa. We are going to end this interview, but I do want to say to the audience, if you have only seen a little piece of this interview, because there's a lot of powerful inspiration and motivation here in this talk, go again. You can see the replays on the website, on YouTube. Go and see the other interviews if you would like. The website is www.INSAD2017.com. And please go and see all the other experts talking about stress. But I was really, really pleased to have you here, Teresa. I'm sure we'll be in touch. And you have given some powerful stories, powerful advice, and I'm sure the people go away with this interview with a lot of things to talk about their dream, about what they really want, about, you know, being that authentic you. And I love that. That is, you know, so in relation with what I'm doing with my work and with what we want to do with this International Stress Awareness Day. So thank you for your, you know, your contribution, and I hope we'll talk soon again. See, bye-bye.
Thank you.